it's not about our sales process. It's got to be about the buyer's journey. It's got to be about understanding from the buyer every step in their journey to solving a business problem that they've identified and why they're looking to use your solution to do that. When I look at what I do and what my drive is that, when you think about it, a company is completely reliant upon sales. And the company is reliant upon being able to accurately forecast the business. And that starts with what the revenue is. So when you miss a forecast or when you're missing what that happens to the business, it impacts everything. It impacts hiring, it impacts earnings per share in a publicly traded company. So it really, the impact is pretty dramatic as we look at, forecasting and what it means to the business. And I've been doing this for a number of years and understand those impacts pretty well of what it means.
Absolutely. Forecasting is essential. Would be interested to hear some of the effects that you may or may have not seen from when forecasting is done really well or when forecasting has been inaccurate. Like what effects or benefits can we bring to the business when it's done in those ways?
I can give you a very specific example. I worked for one company and a very large opportunity was missed that was absolutely committed to the business, and it missed. And because of that, we missed our earnings per share by 2 cents. Because of missing our earnings per share by 2 cents, we had to lay off 23 people. So just missing that forecast, the 23 people lost their jobs. That is about as much of an impact as I could imagine it being. On the other side, when I look at my sales team and what I'm really proud of is helping salespeople achieve their goals and their dreams, right? When they really hit their forecast and they go above and beyond that, it's about doing something more than just hitting their number. It's about achieving something that literally can change their lives in some ways. It's about putting their kids through school. There's so many things that happen on the positive side when your sales team achieves their quota or their forecast. And mine number is really a reflection of the success or non-success of my team.
Yeah. Okay. Forecast has incredible impacts, either in a beneficiary way or sometimes not so. But
that's right.
How do you think forecasting pressures have changed in recent years?
They changed pretty dramatically. I think when you look at forecasting, the old way about it was what was called BANT, budget, authority, need, and time, right? If you confirm the budget, met the decision maker, what are the next steps? They've agreed to buy for the quarter, and that's what we were focused on. And I think the biggest thing about that focus is when you look at that, it's all about us, and it's not about the customer. And so I think what's changed over the last years is the fact that now it's really about the buyer's journey, understanding the buyer's process, understanding that there's 6 to 10 actual decision makers in an organization. And if you don't really understand who those 6 to 10 are, that any one of them can derail your opportunity in a quarter. And so I think that's the biggest thing that's changed, the number of decision makers, understanding their buying process. And when I say their buying process, not just when they're going to buy, if you don't understand the reasons why they're buying and when they need to be live, then you back into the close date. And it makes it very simple. It should make it a non-event if you do it correctly, versus this everything about when are they going to buy, when are they going to buy, when are they going to buy. If you don't understand the value of when they need to be live on your solution, there's no reason for them to buy. So it's got to be about the solution and the pain that you're helping them solve and the future state of where they want to be.
Yeah. Okay. It's a great theme here, David, which is forecasting being linked to an actual sales process and how that's changed, and
Yep.
how forecasting is linked to really strong discovery. So forecasting sounds like the output, the end thing that happens from those two things at the beginning.
Well, I would almost change the words though that you used of the sales process. It's not about our sales process. It's got to be about the buyer's journey. It's got to be about understanding from the buyer every step in their journey to solving a business problem that they've identified and why they're looking to use your solution to do that. If we focus on the client and not on our sales process, we'll get to a decision much quicker.
Yeah. Okay. So if we're thinking then about the buyer's journey, an important thing to consider is ensuring that the behaviors are aligned and in place for a forecast to retain integrity as it passes through the sales org layers. So what would you have to say about that, David? How does that work?
And I'm sorry, but you cut out again.
No worries. So if we're thinking about the buyer's journey, we need to also think about how behaviors are aligned in our revenue function to make sure there's integrity as it passes through those layers. And how do you ensure that happens, David? How do you make sure there's integrity, good handoffs, that discovery isn't missed and that forecast isn't missed?
Yeah, and look, let's keep in mind, because to your point is once you truly understand the buyer's journey, then you can match that to your selling process, right? Because that's going to be the next step, is making sure that we've matched it to that. And the best way that I say this all the time, you can't expect what you don't inspect. And by that, what I mean is working with your sales team is understanding, do they understand the buyer's journey? Do they understand the process? Have they understood all of those steps involved so that you can match that up to the date that we're looking for closure on this? Because now everybody is in alignment. And if we looked at that and we inspected it on a weekly basis and a weekly cadence, that every week we should be asking those questions about where we are in the journey, right? What steps did we complete? Oh, and by the way, the journey changes constantly. And every time that we make that change, if we reviewed it back with the client misses, maybe there's something that we were supposed to do. We were going to do a presentation, but it got moved out 2 weeks because somebody got COVID, right? So now it moved out 2 weeks. Okay, what does that mean to the journey? That means you wanted to be live by April, you just missed 2 weeks. How are we going to make up that 2 weeks? Oh, the date just moved. Our close date just moved, by the way, right? So you got to understand that, and that's why it's a constant inspection in strategy of what those events look like to make sure you stay on track.
Yeah, okay. This brings up a really interesting point as well, because some of what we're talking about there is visibility. Can we see what's going to happen with the deal? We're having that close date in mind. And some of it might be tactics. How are we actually working the deal? Are we doing the right thing? So how far is forecasting built for either tactics or visibility, or how do we do a bit of both?
Well, keep in mind when we talk about the sequence of events and the steps, what we're talking about is, by the way, our selling strategy that matches up to that, so that as a team, we should be agreeing, look, in these opportunities, especially the larger ones, you should have constant strategy sessions. Are we on track? How are we positioned? What do we see our competitor doing? Where are our gaps? Where have we identified the areas that we don't know the information? That there's a lot of people would look at it and say, I always hear about all the reasons why somebody's going to buy. What I need to understand is why somebody won't buy, because until you identify that, nobody's ever going to buy, right? It's more important to understand why they won't than it is about why they will in a lot of ways. So you can address that.
Yeah, and that's another good point, actually. Reps, we tend to be optimistic folks, need to have a positive attitude, can have the flip side of a sales leader, CRO, that we hear positive things. So how do you cut through the noise and the fluff? How do you see what's really happening in a deal, for example?
Yeah, and look, especially one of the areas that you got to be very careful of for sales reps that may be under pressure, that they're well behind quota. right? That they need that deal to close because, they're getting the pressure of you have, you miss the last 2 quarters, you got to get this deal in. And so what I'd say is what you've got to do is it's really about the data in that sequence to go, hold on, you still have this predicted, but we've missed the last 3 days. What does that mean? What does that do to our process about when they're looking to buy? And how do we get, how do we speed that back up again, maybe? How do we condense steps? Are they thinking that way, or is really their strategy hope? And hope is not a good strategy, right? So you really have to spend the time to investigate and understand those activities that are we still on track with where we were. The other spot that I'm a big believer in is getting being the executive sponsor and having the contact with their executive sponsor for that alignment. I think that's critical to understand of where they see it. And that a lot of times is a peer-to-peer discussion. So one of my goals and my responsibilities in the top 20% of opportunities is my role in that of aligning with the executive team to make sure and confirm those opportunities.
Yeah, okay. The beginning of this, David, you mentioned data. The place I wanted to start with, quite a big topic there, is how has data changed forecasting in recent years, or perhaps maybe it hasn't, but what have you seen in the world of data and forecasting in your time?
Oh, it's changed it dramatically, right? And you've heard me focus so much about the journey and all that. That helps us determine at what sales stage are we at, right? Are we qualified? And that's the data, right? Of what we're talking about. And once we understand that data, we know what stage they're at. And so much of my forecast is based off the average weighted pipeline. So that's what I look at on a daily basis. Where's the average weighted pipeline? That tells me what my chances are to make my number, right? That tells me, are we in track? If we're committing $10 million for the quarter, and all of a sudden my average weighted pipeline drops down to 9, I know I've got a major issue. It goes up to 14. I'm still nervous because I'm a sales manager. But you're always looking at that data points to see what's going up and what's going down. And with that inspection, by the way, there are times that a deal might go from 30% probability to 40, back down to 20, because all of a sudden we find out our competition has done something different. So that has put us behind. Or we find out that something has happened at that account that realistically says that there's a split amongst those 6 to 10 decision makers, and one of them is leaning towards the competitor, and he's got or she's got more influence than the others.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so data is becoming incredibly important in forecasting, and this changes some of the revenue org in general, doesn't it? Roles like sales or revenue operations and analyst roles. Really interesting to see how you've changed your relationship or how you leverage those types of roles as data plays a bigger part.
Well, the data doesn't lie, right? To your point a minute ago, sales reps are very optimistic in most cases. But look, you have to manage by the individual salesperson or the first line manager, second line, depending on what role you're in. You have to manage by them because some are also, the slang term is sandbaggers, right? They're the ones that are always going to undercommit and overdeliver. But by the way, that's also not as good for business sometimes either, right? Because of that. So you have to understand the personalities of the people that report into you and what they are. Are they ones that are going to undercommit their numbers? And ones that they do it on a consistent basis. So those you may look at and say, I'm going to give them a little bit more leverage, or I'm going to look at their pipeline a little bit differently as compared to somebody else that is the optimistic person that always thinks every deal's going to close, but we know that they're going to always end up at 70 to 80% of their commit. So you have to look at each one of those a little bit, as an individual basis to understand it. But what that requires is that's where I always have with my managers is a weekly cadence, right? which I'm expecting them to have a weekly cadence with their reps so that we're all in line with where the forecast is. By then, they've done the inspection of the things that I've talked about with the buyer's journey and the steps, right? We understand when they want to be live. We understand what the close dates are. We understand where the pipeline is. And then I'm working with the managers to understand where their team is on those numbers. And it's all, to your point, data driven.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So how then do we roll this up to the top levels of the business, mate? Be it the board, the CEO, whoever it would be? How does this work on the next level upwards?
Yeah, and that's that's one of the biggest challenges, because the very first thing that you got to understand is CEOs don't have a lot of understanding about deal slipping, people missing their number. So it is something that you have to be very careful of, and especially if you're in a high growth, right? If you're in a high growth, you need to truly understand where those numbers need to be to meet the business objectives. Because a lot of times in those high growth companies, you may have VC money, and VCs want to see the return. So everything is about expectation setting from the beginning to the end. And in each quarter, you've got to make sure of where you are in those numbers. And look, in some cases, you're forecasting deals that probably aren't quite as baked as what you would want them to be to put in there. But you got to look at your averages, your historical, right, to really come up with where those numbers are. The other part I would say to you is this. The other part that you have to be aware of is, the question is, if you're going to miss that forecast, when do you say it? When do you actually say something? I can tell you this immediately. Immediately forewarn the business about the challenge, that you had a major deal that slipped. In my operation now, we typically have got one transaction that constitutes over 50% of the pipeline for the quarter. If that deal slips, the chances to get your number become very unlikely, right? So you got to understand that if you're in that situation, how do you forecast? And when a deal is, you feel like you're in danger of missing it, you have a responsibility to the business to make them aware of the danger. But more importantly, what you have to have is, okay, here's the risk associated with the forecast, and here's my close the gap plan. So what am I going to do differently than what we're doing today to try to make up that gap because of that lost opportunity, or if it's maybe number of lost opportunities?
Okay. It's a few really interesting themes coming out of that, because forecasting, we said earlier, is really part of the buyer's journey or process. And then, as you said, in high growth, it can be particularly hard because deals aren't always as baked as you would like to be. And part of the reason is because when we are high growth, those sales processes or buyer's journeys are still being thought out and decided and planned. So I'm really interested to hear how high growth, the nature of high growth, and still working out the buyer's journey and what that should be does to the forecast if we tie all of this together.
Well, I will tell you the number one thing that you have to do, and this is going a little bit off topic, but what's critical in a high growth mode is that you are 6 months to 9 months out, hiring the right people, getting them trained, getting them in a productive mode in your company that they can accurately forecast. I think one of the biggest challenges is, perfect example, we're August of 2021. If you know that you're going to have a high growth for 2022, if you're not already hiring those people right now, you're behind, right? Because the fact is by the time you bring them on, the new people always want to bring up, about a deal that they think they can close, right? But they're new to the process, they're new to everything. And so your forecast is always at risk when you have brand new salespeople committing deals.
Yeah.
So it really backs up to make sure you've got the right people in the right place at the right time with the right skill sets that can forecast accurately, so you can forecast accurately, because your forecast is really a reflection of what you analyze from your team of being successful. And you've got to make sure that you're doing the right steps early in the process to get there.
Yeah, great answer, David. Final question for you here then. If you're in a room full of CROs, but the best to ever do it, what would you ask them?
Wow, that's a really good question. Um, I would say, what's your secret to success for growing something in a absolutely high growth mode? I've done it, but I tell you, your best of your best, those are people that you're always going to learn from, that they've done something different than you've done that may get you an extra 10% or 5%. And so that would be the thing I would want to know, is if you're in that rapid growth VC backed, you got to hit those numbers. What's your secret, right? Of what you do. And I guarantee you, every one of us has our own unique. I sort of gave you mine, but every CRO will have their spin on what it does or the way that they do it. And, it is a different, look, I've been managing sales teams for a long time. Things are different in the way that you hire, that you may have a team now that's cross-generational, that you may have 3 different generations of people on your team, and how you manage those. Each one may forecast differently. So we really, as sales leaders, really have a lot more responsibility now than I think what we did before in forecasting, because we have to take all of these factors into consideration.